Hey guys. So, as you probably already know, I recently challenged Nathan Oakley to provide me with a hypothesis and suitable methodology for measuring the shape of the Earth. This was a challenge which has been given to Nathan in one form or another, starting with comments on his channel for over a year, and which has never been addressed. The reasons for issuing this particular challenge are varied, but primarily stem from the fact that Nathan spends every day making demands for scientific proof of Earth's curvature, making sure that a very narrow definition of science must be adhered to, should anyone be silly enough to attempt to answer him on his joke of a show. By making this very specific demand, Nathan has intentionally rigged the game. It ties himself and everyone else to the idea that measuring the shape of the Earth requires a formal hypothesis with the inclusion of both an independent and dependent variable showing a cause and effect relationship, which is an experimental procedure. It also demands that any determination of the shape of the Earth which does not adhere to this method is, by definition, not science, and therefore, according to his own rhetoric, pseudoscience. As he can be found making these claims every day and, while doing so, insists on lecturing everyone about what science is as though he knows better than anyone else, it should have been a trivial matter for Nathan to demonstrate his deep understanding of the scientific method by drawing up his own hypothesis. And remember, this was not a challenge to prove the Earth was a specific shape, be it flat, spherical or anything else, but to provide the appropriate reasoning and methodology for making a measurement which would identify the shape while adhering to the experimental process involving the required variables. In short, Nathan was required to put his money where his mouth is by providing an objective, logical method for resolving the Earth's shape, adhering to the rules he himself demands each day, proving in the process that his demands aren't bogus. Had he successfully done so, Nathan could have shown everyone exactly how one would use this specific method to provide proof of the Earth's shape. He would demonstrate he actually understands how to apply the scientific method himself and is not just parroting the words scientific method or hypothesis with no true comprehension of what it means to put the method into practice. In turn, he would have been able to use the demonstration to boost his own arguments by successfully achieving what supposedly no globe earther has ever been able to, and giving everyone the necessary knowledge to measure the Earth scientifically, ending the so-called flat Earth debate. But of course he did none of this. He failed. He made his excuses and ran away with his tail between his legs like the pointless little troll we all know he is. He didn't even have the guts to reply directly to me out in the open, but tried instead to hide his response in a nested comment to someone else. So I was only able to see that because I happened to click on that thread. You can read his comment here and you'll see that when faced with the challenge, he immediately proved himself to be a hypocrite on every single level. Nathan is a troll who knows nothing about science, who will never even set foot outside for a simple observation, let alone perform any scientific tests. He wouldn't know how to formulate a proper hypothesis if his life depended on it, and you can definitely forget him deriving a good methodology for testing a hypothesis. Because he's nothing but a couch surfer with a drama show, who has included the use of the scientific method into his script because it creates an illusion of superiority in the eyes of his gullible fans who can't see the trick he's playing. And so the cash keeps rolling in for the YouTube theatre production that is the inappropriately named Flat Earth Debate Show, where Nathan shouts and screams abuse at his guests while behaving like an angry 5-year-old. The script contains some overused catchphrases delivered in a predictable, routine format, which revolve around first demanding some proof which adheres to the scientific method, then accusing anyone who tries to offer an example of an observation or measurement of being guilty of several fallacies. These being affirming the consequent, begging the question, and reification, while they assume or presuppose r, the radius of the Earth. And yet, as you will see, from this one comment of his alone, which echoes the sentiments he repeats daily on his show, Nathan is absolutely guilty of all of these fallacies and has admitted that flat Earth is nothing but pseudoscience. In addition to being guilty of such extreme hypocrisy, he proves that he doesn't understand the scientific method, and his demands are inherently fallacious in nature, as he not only contradicts the method itself when he attempts to lay down the rules, but he completely misapplies it in the first place by asking that a pure measurement adhere to the method. So let's go over this for a minute. First, let's consider the application of the method itself. An experiment involving an independent and dependent variable requires that one variable be controlled and manipulated by the experimenter while observing what effect that has on a second variable which is expected to respond in some way. This experimental process is not applicable to a pure measurement. If I need to know the length of a piece of wood, I use a tape measure and nothing more. There is no variable to manipulate and no effect occurring in response to that manipulation. The wood has a given length and I measure it using an appropriate tool which adheres to an established standard using incremental units in order to quantify the length empirically, and that is it. I can just as easily measure the shape of something without having to induce a cause and effect scenario. The shape is a set parameter and all I require is the appropriate tool for taking a measurement which similarly conforms to a standard. The type of measurement can vary along with the tool that best serves the purpose, but at no point is the manipulation of a variable and corresponding effect involved in making that measurement when it comes to pure geometry. So before we even begin, the gotcha that Nathan tries to hide behind, the foundation of his entire argument is a fallacious demand. It's both a straw man and a red herring, as the method doesn't even apply to the problem to be solved, and invoking it is simply a means to distract his viewers from the truth and unbalance any opponent who isn't paying enough attention. Secondly, let's consider the constant complaint that anyone who tries to explain certain methods of measurement demonstrating curvature are guilty of assuming R, which Nathan claims makes them guilty of no longer adhering to the scientific method and thus engaging in fallacy. The fundamental nature of a hypothesis is to make an assumption, and the experiment which follows is designed to test that assumption in such a way as to determine its validity. The ultimate purpose of any experiment or test is to hopefully answer a question. A question must be based upon us not knowing the answer in the first place, or else it would no longer be a question, it would be knowledge, and we wouldn't have any need to experiment or test a hypothesis, except when confirming previous results. If we don't have the answers, we must use assumptions until we validate or eliminate them. Assumptions are not just random guesses with no reasoning behind them, they're guided by an existing knowledge and applied logically. For example, in the case of determining the shape of the Earth, we already know the inherent properties of various geometric shapes. Therefore, we can make a logical assumption about the results of our observations and measurements prior to making them. So, assuming R is actually a part of the scientific method. By denying anyone the necessary step of making an assumption, Nathan destroys any hope of sticking to the scientific method. His demands are again therefore entirely fallacious and demonstrate his lack of comprehension of the scientific method, or that he's just intentionally dishonest. Now let's take a look at his cop-out of a comment concerning his position and that of Flat Earth and see how well he stacks up against his own criteria. So he starts off with predictable accusations that come from his script, claiming that it's us or me that are religious about the shape of the Earth or whatever we believe, assuming R and so on. Well, first of all, we've addressed the assuming R nonsense. Assumptions are a part of the scientific method and Nathan doesn't seem to know that, or he chooses to deliberately lie about it. We've also seen that Nathan is not just unwilling to do science, he is completely incapable, as demonstrated by his cowardice in this very response to the challenge. So it's fair to say Nathan is woefully unqualified to discuss anything about science, let alone project his own reliance on faith-based assertions on anyone. Still, although we already addressed the assumption of R in a general sense, let's explore it a little bit further. Nathan claims it's an assumption, but it's actually a measured value achieved through basic geometry. There are several techniques for making or deriving this measurement, from horizon dip, shadow angles, angles to Polaris, right through to the use of modern satellites for precise sensing. Nathan refuses to accept any of these measurements, but that's inconsequential to the fact that they've been made many hundreds of thousands of times over the course of several centuries, and the majority of the techniques are repeatable by anyone. The most recent direct measurements provided within the Flat Earth community come to us courtesy of Jesse Kozlowski, Soundly and Tim Osman respectively. In each case, a high-precision GPS unit plotted physical data points within a Cartesian coordinate system, revealing the measured area to be curved. From that measurement, we can then derive the circumference, diameter and radius of the Earth. Now, this is where Oakley, Riley, QE and all their little sycophants who think they're clever will claim that this is not a measurement of the radius. So let's take a look at the simple reason why this is just their bias and ignorance talking. Because a sphere is essentially an infinite number of circles arranged around a central point in a circle, they both share the same three measurable properties: the circumference, diameter and radius. If we have any one of those values, we can derive the remaining two. To put it in simple terms, if you know the radius, double this for the diameter and reverse the process to find the radius from the diameter. Pi, a constant which tells us the ratio of a circle's diameter to its circumference, allows us to do much the same. If you have the diameter, you can multiply by pi to find the circumference and again reverse this process to find the diameter by dividing the circumference by pi. And of course from there the radius is pretty easy. With a circle we can directly measure all three because it is essentially a two-dimensional plane and we can physically reach any part of it. With a sphere, the surface encloses a volume of 3D space, so if we wish to know either the radius or the diameter, we either have to enter that space and measure it directly, or we can simply measure the circumference or part of it and derive the radius and diameter as noted a minute ago. The second option is the technique we use to determine the radius of the Earth, and it's all that is required. Denying the validity of this is to literally deny geometry itself and the multitude of applications in which it's used, and has been since the beginning of civilization, especially in the modern industrialised world. If Oakley, QE or any of their puppets wish to challenge this fact, they must present a demonstration that these intrinsic mathematical relationships, which have been in use for millennia, do not exist, that pi is not a fundamental constant, and our entire understanding of geometry is wrong. So, to sum up, r is not assumed, and even if it were, that would still be a valid part of the scientific process, and far more scientific than anything Oakley can produce. So the next point in Oakley's comment is really to deny that he's ever had any claims related with science. So Oakley is distancing himself from the very notion that either he or Flat Earth in general involves science, or that there is any scientific claim for a Flat Earth. This is actually a really simple point to address, because we fully agree. Oakley is not a scientist, cannot do science, does not understand science, and avoids science like the plague when he's put on the spot. And Flat Earth has absolutely no science backing it, and all of the claims by Flat Earthers are pseudoscientific nonsense. By extension, any claim Oakley makes is, by his own admission now, nothing but pseudoscience. Therefore, Oakley freely admits that he is a pseudoscientist, that his claims are purely pseudoscientific, particularly any claim pertaining to the shape of the Earth. You know, somebody might think, this is fairly odd behaviour for someone who bases his entire show around the supposed defence of science and the scientific method. And as a defence of Flat Earth, it's a total failure. He has thrown Flat Earth under the bus while running away shouting, "It wasn't me," over his shoulder. If you're a fan of Oakley, why don't you take a good long look at this and think about who you are defending and treating like a hero? Nathan then goes on to bury himself with a statement which blends together multiple logical fallacies in one messy pile of ignorance. Here Nathan admits that his only case for Flat Earth is to affirm the consequent by assuming that the visibility of a given object is proof that its visible position is its actual position. If the object is physically there, it is visible. The object is visible, therefore it's physically where he thinks it is. Therefore, Flat Earth. He assumes that no optical phenomena are taking place during observation, in order to affirm his belief that there are no optical phenomena. He does this with no data, no measurement, no test, and these aren't even his own observations. He's just looking at pictures on a screen from his couch. So he has literally nothing but his own personal bias towards flat Earth. By his own rules, he's begging the question in an attempt to reify an unproven geometric model which exists only in his head. And remember, according to Nathan, all models are pseudoscience as well. And it gets even worse. We know the atmosphere causes optical effects daily, and that is exactly what he, Ranty and Riley have been arguing for to explain why objects disappear bottom up for about 2 years now. So he is by this point balls deep in total hypocrisy. Pun intended. To round this whole mess off, in his list of acclaimed proofs supporting his religious belief in mirageless observations, he includes the Chicago skyline, one of the oldest and most debunked flat earth lies. An observation which is demonstrably caused by a mirage, which we can see in Joshua Nowicki's video and read about in his blog describing quite clearly the requirement for a mirage to make the observations possible. And before we start wrapping this up, let's not forget, there was a second series of challenges issued to Nathan relating to his comments regarding math. He didn't even try to address a single one of them in his reply. There's no point wasting any more time saying anything else about that particular failure. It speaks for itself. So overall, what have we learned or can we say about Nathan, both for his pathetic response to the challenge and how he conducts himself daily in his echo chamber? He's a liar, a hypocrite and an incompetent. He exhibits, whether falsely or otherwise, a fundamentalist religious belief in flat earth, which is nothing but pseudoscience, and he defends his pseudoscientific beliefs through the use of a whole host of logical fallacies, all of which he dogmatically accuses others of. He spends every day putting on an act as the angry flat earth anti-hero defending his fellow flarefers against the nasty globeheads by supposedly championing the scientific method, despite having never done anything scientific, failing to accurately apply the scientific method in his arguments, failing to adhere to the scientific method himself, failing to personally try to demonstrate a working knowledge of the scientific method when challenged for over a year, and running away like a scared little bitch at the mere thought of facing up to a challenge which, according to his script and the beliefs promoted by his most vehement disciples, he should have been able to perform with his eyes closed and his hands tied behind his back. He's just a weak, cowardly fraud who stays in the safe space of his echo chamber where he can control the narrative and give his audience the dramatic performance they crave, because he's really nothing but a low-rent, out-of-work, wannabe actor who wouldn't know science if it rose up and slapped him across his smug face with a catalogue of Feynman books, whose only interest lies in raking in as much cash as possible from gullible, ignorant, flat-earth sheep who are easily fooled into believing that the debate show equivalent of the WWE is actually the real deal. Nathan is a narcissistic whore with a disgusting mouth and attitude who craves attention and will do literally anything to get it, having crossed too many boundaries in his desperation to be noticed to deserve any interaction that puts his name in the spotlight, and for that reason I generally ignore him. But he does tend to get ideas above his station on his show, and there's a plague of brainwashed trolls running around believing the shit that he's shoveling, praising him as some unstoppable flat earth guru. After more than a year of him being such a pussy, it was time to highlight just how worthless he is, to make sure that everyone sees that Nathan Oakley is just a spineless pseudoscientific pretender clown who will stay in his echo chamber and keep hiding from reality so long as it serves his selfish needs. If you're one of his fans, you're being mocked and worshipping a cowardly half-wit who's only interested in your money. Don't come running to me pretending otherwise, especially after it's been spelled out for you. Nathan Oakley not only can't science, he will never be able to prove me or anyone else wrong on this fact. He is a complete fraud and he knows it well enough to run and hide. It's your turn to realise it. As always guys, thanks for watching, and I'd like to briefly say hello to the new subscribers who joined the channel recently. Thank you very much for jumping on board guys, and hopefully soon we'll have some more videos that you'll enjoy. See you in the next one.